Nice to meet you.
Let's do boy, girl, boy, girl.
Boy, girl, boy, girl.
So it looks like you're getting nice shoes. I have them.
Oh, awesome. I'm like reliving my
Too bad you
childhood.
didn't wear them.
I
I
know.
know. This is brand new. Put the number in. Got so quiet. Is this it for our local audience?
Yeah, this is it for the local audience. That's fine, we have hundreds viewing online.
Let's go.
Okay.
No pressure.
Okay, we're ready to get started?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me get my notes up here first then. Welcome to everybody for coming to our first Blue Collar Post Collective West panel. It's called Breaking Barriers, Making Post More Inclusive. This is the first in a series of talks on the human side of post. We're going to be doing at least 2 other ones in the future. And we're live streaming this event thanks to the Sim group, so you can watch it afterwards too. So if it's really great, please share it with your friends. I'm holding this iPad not because I'm really awkward and uncomfortable, but we're taking questions from the audience online on the YouTube chat and on Twitter. And if you want to throw in a question via Twitter too, so you can throw it into the conversation, I'm going to mix it up, grabbing some from online and then the ones that we've already prepared. So, okay, so we're talking about making post more inclusive. What do we mean by that? We don't really talk about being inclusive, we talk about diversity and stuff. So what we mean is making post more inclusive is assuring everyone, regardless of gender, of race, of sexual orientation, or any other factor, that there is a place for them in this industry if they want it. So this panel isn't Diversity 101. We're not talking about the result of the problem. Like the result of the problem is long established. We know the statistics. We know that there are 21% of TV editors are women. We know that people of color don't do any HBO programming. We know all that stuff. We're not going to throw stats to you. We're going to get to the root of the problem itself, which is the systemic bias that makes our industry unwelcome and difficult to enter for people. So we're going to share and listen to each other, figure out how we can collaborate, and whether you're an underrepresented part of the group or not, there's a lot that you can learn from that. So we're not here to blame. We're not going to play the blame game with this. We're here to continue to make this conversation mainstream. So these 4 people are working in the industry right now, and their experiences and actions are changing what it means to be an expert. So we have Joe Delgado. He's the lead assistant editor at Geiger Post. Kate Haight, who is an editor, works on Transparent, is currently cutting a feature. Mark Hartzell, also an editor, currently cutting Animal Kingdom. And Lauren Ellis, who is a VFX producer for The Molecule, the LA Molecule. So welcome, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So first, I really want you all to tell me about a project that you've worked on that you're really proud of and why. So I'm just going to go down the line and make it
All right.
easy. So
Well,
you're going first.
Great. Well, this was easy. Okay. So where I work at, it's an online facility. So we do a lot of, and it's a boutique company. So we're kind of just a little bit smaller than the big guys, and we do a lot of just onlining, VFX sometimes. We don't do sweetening, but one project that I'm kind of proud of is pretty much a lot, but one of them that stands out now is recently. I think it was about 5 months ago, we did a Disney 60th anniversary special. And for me, it was just, my boss told me, oh, we're going to do this. And I was like, okay, great. So one of the greatest moments was, or basically the whole project was more so visionary, because a lot of people had a vision behind the whole project. And they kind of prioritized vision first, then production. And I guess maybe they had a big budget, but regardless, and it was also a technical challenge for me because I have to make sure everything is kind of, kosher with it. So one of the proudest moments I had was because we're a small company, and I'm aspiring to be an online editor. I get to do some paint outs and some VFX shots and stuff like that. And so one time, one of my editors who was cutting the show brings me in the room EP's there, client's there, everyone's there, and he asks me, hey Joe, so because I had already shot the whole kind of event, BB-8, the little BB-8 Star Wars robot that comes out from the stage, and then the camera pans around him, and then basically shoots kind of like a beam of light to the to like a projector, and where the orchestra is at, and basically he's shining a light, so then that way the film plays, and he asks me, how long would it take you to make that light, to like make that beam, and make it look like it's legit? And I was like, right in front of like, the EPs and everyone. I was like, why are you asking me, And I was like, 3 hours. And then he's like, oh, well, that's great because this other company was saying 13. I was like, like, what did I get myself into? So ultimately, that day I just kind of focused on that shot and I made it happen. And then the next day I turn it around, give it to him, and the clients just really enjoy it because it looked, I guess, legit. There were no Star Wars references at the time because the film was just out. So what I saw on December 26th was my only reference, and and then they sent it over to Lucasfilm, and they really enjoyed it. They were like, who did this? And it was great. So ultimately, I was really proud of that moment, and that just made me give like 200% to the whole technical project because I kind of forgot that I was like the lead assistant editor for this thing. And I was like, oh wait, I have to make sure to deliver the show, So that was one of the highlights of this year. So and there's others, but that's one of the prominent ones.
I'd have to say transparent, of course. It's probably the thing I've worked on the most recently that's had a big impact, both on my life, of course, and on the conversation that it's part of in terms of the transgender tipping point, or however you want to call it, in this country right now. So it's been exciting to be part of a project that the story of the show itself, what it has to say, but also the way the show is run and the way employment happens behind the scenes. There's a lot of trans people who work on the show, a lot of genderqueer people who work on the show, who are part of the actual process, and it speaks to the inclusivity thing that you mentioned in terms of like, if you're going to tell trans stories, you need to have trans people involved in telling those stories. So yeah, I'm really proud of the work we've done on that show.
Keeping in the inclusivity, diversity thing, I'm going to say there's two actually. Last week I was at Outfest, and it's the LA LGBTQ Film Festival. HBO is a big sponsor of that. And before every screening, there's an HBO promo that shows their shows that have put a spotlight on LGBTQ issues. And True Blood was on it. I'm always like, I get to be part of that for the rest of my career because that happened. And it was such a good show and so naturalistic and inclusive with queer characters. And then also Marvel's Agent Carter I got to work on. And that's the only, not the only, but the most prominent for me female character in the Marvel Universe who's, not that there's anything wrong with wearing a catsuit and having superpowers, but she's not sexualized, and she ends up kicking ass with her training, with her intellect, and with her strength as a person. And I'm really proud of both of those. So.
Lauren?
I have two as well, and they're for two totally different reasons. One is Queen Sugar, because it's the most intentional project I've ever been a part of. The creator director, Ava DuVernay, was very intentional about who worked on that with her, and it's the most diverse in every way that I've ever experienced. So I'm proud to be a part of that. There's so much history behind the scenes and in the story itself, so I'm happy to be a part of that. And House of Cards, because I love that show, and I was really excited to work on that.
What did you do on House of Cards? You're the FX producer?
Yeah, one of them. I mean, it's a multi-house project, but we worked on some shots in the last season, and I was so excited about that. So, yeah.
That's cool. Cool. Great. Those are really great stories. And it kind of leads right into my next question, which is, what does being inclusive mean to you personally? And how do you see this reflected in Hollywood?
For me, I historically would be a double minority, right? So I'm a black woman. But if I'm I'm speaking openly and honestly about what it means to be inclusive at the top of my mind, it would be my color first, then my gender. And that is because of how the perspective has been shaped in my life, if that makes sense. So that does not mean that I exclude anybody else. It just means that at the top of my mind, when I walk into a room and I don't see anyone that looks like me, that's the first thing I notice, because I may be in a room full of women, but if none of them share that other part of me that's the most obvious, then it's not as inclusive as I might like it to be. So like I said, at the top of my mind, it would be, how many people of color do we see in this room? And then it's my gender. And I had to be honest about that when I really thought about that question, which was at the top of my mind, and that's the truth of it for me.
Wow. So, for me, I know the statistics that, post-production it's very male dominated and white male dominated. And this is where I'm like, foot and mouth. But, in my mind, I always think back on post-production should be the AV club grown up. It's it should be like Revenge of the Nerds, but you get to be at the top of the list, and it's where when you think of the AV club, it's always going to be like somebody who's differently abled, people of color, the gays, the headgear. It's the misfits, but it's also the really, really intelligent, creative misfits, and that's sort of my mind. I always joke the editorial is like either the chess club, the math club, or the AV club all put into one. So I feel like, because I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of women and a good number of minorities in the shows I've worked on that are, I guess, atypical. But I feel like there has to be some interesting way to reach back towards the AV clubs of the world and be like, hey guys, come on up, because, this is our time. So, if that made any sense.
No, it did.
It does make sense.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a tough question. I mean, I'm not sure how I define diversity, but I would say, to at least try and have cutting rooms or post-production facilities look a little bit like the way America actually looks, instead of being so white and so male. In terms of my own experience and what I try to do is it's important for me to think about diversity when I think about mentorship specifically, and who are the kinds of people who I'm looking to help if I can. So I feel like women have to help each other. I believe very strongly in that. So, I run a women in editorial meetup and that sort of thing. So to me, there's a certain amount of responsibility that comes along with it, that you have to sort of walk the walk, and you can't just say, oh, I wish things were different, but you have to take steps to make change.
Well, they pretty much summed it all up, but I agree with all three, and it's events like these that really help bring people together, because sometimes people are not aware of this fact or the statistics, and just events like these just inspire people to do other events, and then those other events and it just becomes a chain, and then essentially all the points are kind of addressed, and then we just have a whole AV club like was mentioned.
Yeah.
So
Great big AV club.
exactly.
Jumping back to what Kate and Mark kind of touched on, you need to take action and mentorship and things like that. Hollywood does have a lot of diversity initiatives, but in the face of all this stuff, the numbers tend to stay the same. Why do you all think this happens? Why do you think those diversity programs aren't necessarily being successful?
I come from a Latino background, so I was raised in East LA and then later Glendale, But you know, it just, I think the only reason is because in my experience and my Latino background, Hollywood is right around the corner, but Hollywood is right here, and then the start line is here, but we think we're here, you know? So with that said, I think just, you know, minorities helping other minorities, or, you know, basically, I mean, all in all, it's just about the education, you know, the curiosity, the striving for what you want. I think it's just a matter of investigating, and again, just, you know, programs like these actually make it easier for people to be able to just communicate, and then, you know, everyone can just, you know, come forward, if that makes any sense. But it just, that's what I think. It's just right around the corner, but we think we're here because, you know, growing up, I would always see the Spanish channel, you know, Univision, and every time editor made it into like Universal Studios or maybe DreamWorks, they would have a whole story behind it, and that was pretty inspiring for me, because that's a way they reached out to me to, you know, kind of continue and just strive for that. So it was kind of like a representation of, I guess, my ethnicity or my background, which I think is great, you know, because ultimately whenever they make it, it's because of someone telling them, someone being a mentor, and, you know, exercising, you know, what they have in their possession and just kind of giving it away, which is great.
Can I piggyback on the education part? I think if Hollywood is going for the existing pool, then they're already pulling from a lack of diversity, right? So before you can have diversity initiatives, you have to dial it back and go to a younger age, if we're honest, and say, hey, these careers exist. The ones we know about are the ones in front of the camera, the directors, the writers, the things that get, you know, the most press about, and they're the fanciest, right? But we never talk about post. Like, there's so many conferences around there, and maybe we have a corner of that conference or a few hours in a day of a particular convention center event where they talk about post. And that is the case across the board. If you don't know about the career, then you're never going to join that pool. You know, you can have the inspiration, but if you have no concept of how to get there,
Right. Exactly.
then you just can't. You think it's a pipe dream. You think that
It's far-fetched.
it's super far-fetched.
Right.
Just because you see it on TV, it's like, oh, they must have had this background, and that's not my background, so that's why I can't get there. You know, it's absolutely education, I think.
Yeah, and it's, obviously it's a problem that's perpetuating because people hire people like themselves. And if you have a white male, you know, majority, it's hard until the people who are in the majority recognize that there is a problem and they decide they want to be part of the solution as well. You're fighting an uphill battle, you know. So the conversations, well, people know the statistics. Not enough, you know. I mean, I feel like finally it's like a real thing people are talking about. Women, you know, the numbers of women directing and that sort of thing are now it's national news. It's discussed on another level than it was, say, 10 years ago. I feel like. So hopefully, you know, when someone like Tom Hanks says, yeah, there's a problem and I'm going to do what I can. Obviously, the white men are not going to fix the problems for us. We all have to participate and make our own way as well. But everyone has to be recognizing that there's a problem to work towards solutions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's interesting because right now in top film schools, the media programs are graduating people that are 50-50 male-female, and yet we still have, at least in creative editing, we still have, you know, 20% is about the number. So do you think that there's some kind of, people think that the numbers aren't quite so bad because some of the most visible editors are women? Is that fair to say?
Yes, I believe that completely, that the few celebrity editors that there are, several of them are women, but the statistics speak otherwise. You know, the membership of the Editors Guild is 75% male.
Lauren, what do you think about the representation of women and women of color and people of color as like in VFX?
In VFX?
Yeah.
It's a pretty diverse field, but I will say from my experience, I can't speak for everyone who's worked in visual effects. For the African American group, I don't see very many of us. I get othered often in any VFX circle, and I've been approached plenty of times to say where if someone learns what I do, if I say I'm a visual effects producer, I've had someone actually say and kind of stare at me and say, excuse me, but I've never actually met a black person that does what you do. How did you find out about this career? And it took a while to be okay with that level of curiosity from someone because you feel othered instantly. I already feel it walking into the room, right? But for someone to actually say it, it takes a different level of class, I think, to be okay with that calling out of things. So from my experience in that realm, not as much for the African American representation. But I will say I've run across I've been in the position to hire from the Latino community, and that makes me excited. Asian communities make me excited. Male, female. There aren't as many female artists that I've been able to find in the pool. It is male dominated, but I think it's a special little corner where that possibility is ripe. You know, it's ripe for it, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah. To that end, when you're a minority in the industry, many people say, and I know that I felt this, when you are underrepresented in the room, you feel like you have to work harder to represent your minority, whatever it might be, in that room because your failures are more noticeable. And that's not just in post, that's in all male-dominated or white male-dominated industries. So have you seen this happen in post, and how do you deal with the fatigue of being the other in the room? Joe?
I have more so like I've not quite experienced it in a way where it's kind of fatigued, but I have been in places where, you know, just because, you know, I'm Latino, they start talking to me like, oh, you know, they give me like all these kind of slang terms, like, you know, all those things, and you know, it's funny. It is funny, especially, you know, when I talk to them like this. But they, you know, it hasn't been to the point where I'm kind of just, you know, tired of it. But I have seen it happen more so with other ethnicities, you know, where they kind of just establish like, oh, like, I don't know if, you know, if he's going to bail or he's going to leave early, or if I don't know if he's trustworthy, you know, and stuff like that. I have seen that. I have not experienced it, but I have seen that. And it's a little unfortunate, but it definitely happens. You know, especially with being like an assistant editor, because, you know, I guess being an assistant editor is just a little bit more expendable, just because everyone starts that way, and it just seems like, oh, well, you know, they make up an excuse, and I've seen that happen where it's like, oh, you know, I'm not sure if you know, he's gonna, you know, organize it properly, so, you know, we'll just get someone else, and then he's replaced by another dude, or you know. And as for women as well, because I was in a post house before the one I'm at, where they were trying to decide to hire an editor, and they kind of just didn't want to hire a female editor because they were just afraid that it would get too. I'm not sure how they worded it, but it was
Catty?
I guess, yeah. It was just, you know, they were kind of just afraid of that. You know, because again, it was male dominated, so they don't want the stress of having a female editor for some reason. You know, that was their thing.
So stressful.
I don't know. So that's why I left.
They don't want to disrupt.
Exactly, because I'm like, if they're stressing about that, they're gonna stress about me. You know, so I was like, probably leave. But yeah, I've seen it happen, but I have not experienced it yet.
I can't point to a specific thing that has happened to me that I can say, oh, I was treated that way because I'm a woman. But what does get exhausting is always, I'm always the one who's on the soapbox. It's like pointing out the problem over and over again, you know. And I can't help it. I'm always going to be that person, but there are times where I'm just like, yeah, here I go again, you know, which, and to not feel like, it's exhausting sometimes when you feel like you're being a nag about something that everyone's like, yeah, we get it. It's like, no, you actually don't get it, because look at the makeup of this cutting room, or whatever it is. To constantly have to be the one harping on it sometimes can be exhausting, but, oh well.
Yeah, it occurred to me on True Blood, I got to out myself as, everybody knows, everybody I work with knows I'm gay. But like, I'm working on a show that's, you know, being written and directed by straight people, acted by straight people, and there's gay content, and then they're in the room discussing how we're gonna portray it. And I'll usually use, you know, humor to be like, you know, hey y'all, as the arbiter of gay in this part of town, you may want to do this, and you know, maybe do this, and that, you know, interject myself there, because it's they're having a discussion about, you know, content creation that's they don't exactly have a firm grasp on.
I think the exhaustive part, I guess, for me and a lot of friends that I have, starts before you ever even touch the industry. For me, it's been something that was a part of my existence since childhood, if that makes sense. And that's just a societal thing, where you, in general, do feel like you're a representative. You have to speak, make sure you're as eloquent as possible, you know, as smart as possible. Because, not to quote Scandal, but there is that line where Papa Pope says, you know, you have to be twice as good, I always told you that. And that was very real to like see that in television, because it's true. So that's before you even come into the industry. And what I'm finding now is what I'd like to do and have the freedom to do and allow myself the freedom to do is to not go into the situation thinking that everyone's going to feel that way about me, if that makes sense. So it's kind of the reverse of it on some level for me, not worrying about how I may sound, because I'm allowed to be given too. So I want to be less tired, and I think the work at this point is twofold, but I'm noticing where I would like to not go into it expecting that that's going to be the environment I'm in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times we talk about the tightrope that you have to walk between being too assertive and being a doormat. And I feel like personally that's difficult for me to deal with. But I like the attitude of just going into it and saying, this is who I am, deal with it. And I think at a certain level in your career, when you have more leeway to do that, it's important to do it.
Yeah. Do you, just, sorry, not to ask a follow-up question to that, but do you think by the time you get there, you're so used to not feeling that way that it's harder once you get to that place and you know that the freedom is there, it's yours for the taking, but it's like being in a cage that doesn't actually have a lock on it, but to you it does. Do you feel that way at all when you're in certain situations?
Do you all?
I don't, but I know that like the only thing that makes me not privileged, I mean I have immense privilege. I'm a white person in this industry. So, and I know that that's where that comes from, that lack of feeling that is privilege, I think.
Well, that leads right into my next question, which is kind of about unconscious bias, which is something that I feel like people have a hard time accepting about themselves, that everyone has some kind of bias. How you perceive the world is shaped by your experiences and who you are as a person. So we all have a bias, and we're all at least kind of sexist, kind of racist, probably in different ways. We have our own biases that we grew up with, and society has shaped us. So what kind of experiences have you had with unconscious bias, and do you think your perspective has shifted over the years?
I've been talking to
I'm thinking about how I would address that, and it might take me a minute. Let's-
I do agree that we
It's
all
a
have
big
them.
question.
Could be like an age thing.
Yeah, I guess it could be age
Yeah.
as
It
well.
could be anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I walk around as an overweight person thinking that everyone's constantly judging me because of my weight, and that thin people are happier and rule the world, which is my, that's Planet Mark is, thin is happy and fat is unhappy, and you go from there.
Right.
And that trickles down to every difference people can have. Everybody, our basic thing is you meet someone and then you start looking for similarities and differences as when you're young. So it's tough. It's a tough one.
For me, it's more so like age, because because currently I'm 23, but when I started, I thought that I was, I thought like people weren't going to accept me because I'm younger, so I would always lie about my age. They'd be like, oh, how old are you? I'm like, oh, I'm 28. I'm like, okay, cool. So, get started. But ultimately, over the years, since I've been, going to like different places, meeting different people, interacting with older people, younger people, it's just been, I've kind of broken that barrier where I really don't care anymore. And, it just feels great because, I thought it was an issue because for some reason I thought when you're 25 you can actually go in post, but below that you can't. You're in school, but that's not the reason, or that's not it at all. So, over the years I've learned that it just doesn't matter as long as you do what you do and it works.
Mm-hmm. I don't think. You brought this up. I think there are probably some things that have affected me that I just don't know, and that I can't speak on. But
Absolutely.
nothing directly to my face. Do I have biases? Absolutely. And it goes back to what I just said of self-talk that tells me when I go into a room, you belong in this room. Don't assume that they don't think you belong in this room. It's me trying to predict their potential biases, if that makes sense. But anything else, I can't speak on because I don't know firsthand if it has stopped me from advancing. I think visual effects is a special little corner of post, to be honest, because every person I've encountered has been positive, and they've been of an inclusive mind. They might not be active about it in some ways, where they may not go out and say, hey, I'm going to be intentional about the hiring procedure. They pick from the same pool, so it's just by what's existing in the pool, they'll keep picking the same numbers that we see, right? But when they do get someone who's different, it is kind of like the AV club. Do you know what you're doing? Are you good at it? And if you know your stuff, it's that special corner where that's cool. Make it blow up this way, So I do think I'm in a special corner of the industry in that regard.
You're in a special corner of the special corner.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Jim.
No, just to follow up on what she said, yeah, I don't have anything specific I can point to, although I assume that there are desks that my resume has landed on that it's been passed over because I'm a woman. But editors, everybody gets pigeonholed too. Like, I'm sure there are people who would say, oh, this resume, there's no way she could cut an action movie. Or, so there's all kinds of bias on all levels.
Yeah, and how do you address your own biases? Do you recognize that you have biases, and how do you keep that in check?
I try to. I really try to. What I try to do is listen to other people as well. Like, when somebody says, oh, this scene is doing this, and I don't know if I feel comfortable with that. Instead of going, yeah, but, and trying to explain why you made those choices, it's important to listen to people who might have a different take, who might have experienced more specifically what it is, the story you're telling. And to try to take that with you on future projects, and to constantly be trying to tell for me, in my, as an editor, to tell stories as authentically as possible. And if you're going to do that, you have to have voices, that are similar to the stories you're telling, being part of the process. And so for me, to listen to people who are different from who I am. and have different experiences, to listen to what they have to say.
So it's important for teams to be inclusive and diverse. How have you worked to make sure that your teams are inclusive, and what challenges are there to making that happen if you're in a position to do that or to encourage that?
I think for me, I talk about what I do as much as humanly possible. I remember I went on set for Queen Sugar just for one day, and she tweeted a photo of me and the AP on the show. And after that tweet, I got so many messages of people who just had never heard of a visual effects producer. And right then, it ignited this desire. You need to talk about what you do, because there's plenty of people who have no clue. And truth be told, I didn't either until I was actively in grad school studying animation. So it's not something that we hear about, ever. And the only reason I heard about it is because I was taking a history class, and I saw end credits on something, and I asked my professor, what's that person do, right? But if you never took that class, if you never saw that documentary, you would never know what that role is. You never know all the crews that make a film or a television show. And so for me, I need to talk about what I do all the time, as much as possible, in arenas where it doesn't even seem like it makes sense. Any networking event I'm in, just say this is what I do, even if it's, community service that I'm doing. This is what I do. And people will automatically become curious because they've never heard it.
Just to write on that point, because I sometimes just say, because I don't say, oh, I'm in the, I'm a lead assistant editor, because no one knows what that is sometimes, or sometimes I've told people, I'm an editor. And they're like, oh, for what magazine? And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. And then I kind of explain. And then it kind of just gets complicated, because then, when you go to online editor, then they think it's for some website. So it's the same thing where it's like, okay, well, I always say, well, we kind of polish it before it goes to TV. And they're like, oh, okay, it makes sense. So again, it's just the whole kind of educating people, and yes, just explaining it to people wherever you go, so.
You'd be curious to see if any of us, when they were 10 years old, were like, I'm going to work in post-production when I grow up. I'm going to be an editor. I'm going to be. It's not something. It's something people tend to discover later, like not late in life, but like it's experimentation in college or in graduate school, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, what is this? And then you sort of go that way. And I feel that like just discussing post-production and visibility in post-production could change that over time, and hearing that like if schools are turning out 50-50 classes, what that tells me is we're going to have to wait for people to age out of their jobs to make room. It's sort of like when the Academy Diversity Initiative went out, and they're like, if you haven't been active in so long, however often, you're not going to vote anymore, you can just go to the movies. And that I'm like, oh, that's what needs to happen is, we will have more inclusivity of everyone once room is made by people either aging out or the jobs. We're in a growth industry right now, especially in episodic television, where there's so much that there should be job creation coming for everyone. And these people are going to become assistants and then move up to become editors. That will take time.
Yeah, do you think that there are other barriers besides just not jobs existing? I guess you did kind of touch on it, that people pull from people that they know, and most of the people that know people are not overly diverse, and they don't go out of their way to find diverse candidates for jobs. And it's really hard in post-production to do that, because it's such a fast turnaround most of the time. You need someone like tonight or right now. So how can we kind of help funnel more people in that are interested right now into these jobs that are available when they are coming up at the last minute? How can we help direct people to that?
I mean, I think you have to constantly be networking and meeting people and trying to I have a folder on my desktop now that I just keep resumes in for people who I've met who are looking for work. So when I get the email that say, hey, I need an assistant, or do you know someone who would cut this web series, or whatever it is, I go straight to that folder. It's really about being intentional about helping other people, which is mentorship. And if you're the one, who's looking for the job, to go to mixers, to go to networking events, to participate in tweets,
And
social
social media.
Like the number of people who I've met through social media is, you especially, you're huge on social media, so there's a huge, I'm just saying, it's like you've mastered the art of using that to network and build community. It's all about community ultimately. Like, just keep meeting people, and you also have to really want it too, though, like, so people you have to do the work. You have to really, but like, as someone who might be able to hire, I really make an effort for mentorship. Mentorship. Say it over and over and over again.
Right. And to put the social media more in context, I met Kate and Mark, I think, on Twitter originally. I met Lauren through Art of Post, which I found out on Twitter originally, and I met Joe through Chris, who I met on Twitter originally. So the internet is like serious business.
It is.
It's legit.
So why does it really matter if an industry is inclusive? And why shouldn't we just hire people on merit only and then just let it take care of itself? Just let the best people come forward and we'll hire them.
I think merit is assuming that everybody had the same opportunity, if that makes sense. And everyone doesn't. I think we know that. And to just, right now we're not in a space where hiring on merit will result in more diversity. We can do it, but it won't end up the way we want it to be, which is more inclusive. So you have to first make sure the pot is the same,
You have to even
right?
the playing field.
You have to even the playing field, and then you can say, let's pick the best, and then chances are you'll have more diversity there. That would be my argument against a merit-based situation right now. I think eventually.
But you'd also have to take care of cronyism and nepotism, and assume that people aren't just going to hire family, friends, and that people aren't going to fail upwards. Because in all industries, especially, potentially, especially Hollywood, some people do fail upwards.
Can you elaborate on what fail upwards means?
Please don't make me do that. There are people who are not necessarily great at what they do, or fair and just people who will find success and will be promoted by other people. So that does happen.
Well said.
Yeah, and I haven't found, I make a point, I think that if you give yourself the time that's needed, granted there are times when you need somebody tomorrow, but if you take the time and you say, I need somebody to start in 6 weeks, and you don't just interview the people who you get in the first 2 days, the 10 resumes you get in the first 2 days that are 9 men and 1 woman, and they're all white. But if you wait, and you wait 2 weeks, and suddenly you have twice as many resumes, which means you have a bit more diversity, more options, more people to choose from, then, I've never had to hire anybody who I didn't think had the merit. You know what I mean? You just have to take the time to dig deeper and find more people and find the diversity and make it happen.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, the first part of your question though was why is that important to have a more inclusive environment in the industry, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said. It needs to look like the world, right?
Yeah.
How else do you tell the stories that are real to the world if only one group is telling the story? From all levels, in post, in front of the camera, behind the camera, you name it. It's not going to reflect reality if you don't have the truth behind the camera or behind the process.
Yeah, and we know that telling different stories can change the way people think too, you know? They can point to, you know, when Modern Family came on the air, suddenly everybody felt like they knew a gay couple even if they didn't in real life. And the numbers, the support for gay marriage, it's like they can like line it up with when Modern Family was airing. I mean, that's crazy. That's really so much power, and it's so important. And so, you know, it's important that all different kinds of stories be told, and you need all kinds of different people to tell all kinds of different stories.
I totally agree.
Okay.
Yeah. Nailed it.
Yes, and there's also been a trend of if it's a woman-driven story, then it's a women's story, and if it's an African-American family, then it's like a black story. And now it's more mainstream to have people that are diverse just as part of the characters. And I think that we can point to the last 10 years in TV as that, because the numbers have shifted slightly, and a small group of people are making a huge difference.
It may take time also, because remember, big entertainment is also a corporate entity, and the corporations aren't really out to take big risks very often. And these are also shows that are going to get focus grouped. And if you ask everybody, you know, what do you want? You wind up with, like, you know, with the most popular, what's going to be the safest? Then it's like Budweiser and a GM car. That's so it's not going to be. The diversity will probably come more as we sort of move away from, I think, network television.
Right, I think that shows on Amazon, Netflix are willing to take more risks, right? Is that fair
Even
to
though
say?
Amazon is a giant corporation,
Yeah.
they somehow let us do whatever we want on Transparent, which they really do.
They're a newer corporation, though. They're not. They haven't been. You know,
Right, but they're still giant,
Yes.
you know, and willing to take risks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel that in your experiences in Hollywood otherwise, it's difficult to have anyone take risks? Or is there a certain amount of that is measured?
We're talking personal experience?
Generally. I'm not sure what the.
It's the edgier, the more interesting, edgy, boundary-pushing content seems to be coming from outside the traditional corporate structure, or the network structure at least. You know.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with that they don't have to please advertisers.
Exactly.
That's true. That is true.
They're not
That's-
worried about losing advertising dollars, you know, and so when there's these financial reasons that people make decisions instead of creative, of course it's going to be less risky.
Well, this is kind of a difficult question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So if you're dealing with a difficult situation in one of these places, how can you be assertive and hold your space without being overly combative and without without getting too beat up over you're trying to assert yourself, but you're in a space where it's not necessarily safe for you to do so? How can you handle those tough spot moments if you've had any? Or if you haven't, then how do you think that would go?
It's a hard question.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough question.
I think I try to go every day and set an intention for my day and who I want to be to who I'm working with, right? And in any given moment, I want to make sure I'm operating from a place of respect. Because intention is never really enough, right? It's what are you doing with that intention? You can say, no offense, but I hate you. And you still say I hate you and I'm offended. So, but if I'm actively trying to come from a place of respect for the other person, the chances of me being received in a combative way are smaller. Not that it won't happen because you can't control how someone else receives you as much, but the chances are smaller, I think. And I actively try to do that. I want to respect your voice, listen to them, And whatever I have to say back, I want to make sure it's coming from that same place of respect that I used to listen to you. So I'm not as worried that they're going to be angry that I said something that they might not like. I'm more, how did I say that? And what was my intention behind my saying that? Was it intended to hurt them? If so, mission accomplished. I can figure that out with no problem. I can say things that will cut. But if my intention is to get the message out, to grow in that moment for myself and for and potentially the other person, then chances of me being combative aren't very high, I think. I want to be respectful, and I want to be treated that way in return.
I want to work with her all the
Yeah.
time.
Can you run the department, please?
Yeah, it's just important to if you're in a situation where you're gonna have an uncomfortable conversation, to know what you want to say ahead of time, and to go in there and be thoughtful and try and be calm and not get overly worked up. But for me, when I have to have conversations that I know are not going to be fun at all, it's really for me about knowing, okay, I'm going to go in the room and this is how, and you can't control where it's going to go from there, but you can say, this is how I'm going to start the conversation, and I'm going to try and be calm. It's very easy for me to get worked up, so for me personally, it's always about just trying to relax and not turn it into a more antagonistic situation than it needs to be.
I feel directness and clarity
Yeah.
tend to help, because I haven't had to deal with any direct issues, but cutting rooms and post-production environments can be very political. And sometimes you do find yourself asking a question and getting your question answered with a question, and then you have to stop and wait, reapproach it, and that can go on for a while if people aren't willing to be direct.
That's actually, I totally agree, because it is totally political, because whenever there is a situation where we've had clients get mad because of, a mistake or something, and, I've always been as pacifist as possible in order to remedy the situation, because it's always, I believe if you are always diplomatic and have facts by your side, and if you have a solution, then they will always grant you that respect that you gave them, because, you gave them your attention, and then you also receive that input, because there are definitely people that are reactive, but you should be proactive, and if for some reason then that doesn't work out, then there's clearly something not wrong with you. It just means that they're not willing to listen, and, ultimately, it's probably not even worth, your time, but, at the same time, even though whatever the result may be, as long as you were diplomatic and you stated the facts that you wanted to, and I think that definitely helps you, because then other people find out about that, and then they start, assessing the situation, then it gets political, and then at the end of it, you'll probably end up getting what you wanted because you weren't worked up.
Well, how can other people who aren't underrepresented in this industry kind of help out with making this industry more diverse? And what do you think needs to happen to make real change?
It's a tough one.
It's a good one.
I mean, in terms of how to make real change, because, I've said it already several times. For me, in terms of what I feel like I should be doing and what I am doing, is mentorship and providing spaces for people to get to know each other, to make connections, community where, to build community amongst all the different kinds of people who should be and are in post-production. But it's hard to know how that plays out, and it'll be interesting to see where we are in 20 years. Change is slow,
Yeah.
and it takes a long time. Especially in an industry like this, where I was an assistant editor for 10 years, which is totally normal. And you know, so it takes 10 years for an assistant editor to become an editor. If they even want to become an editor, they might stay an assistant editor. So it takes time for the numbers to change.
I was too, it's totally normal.
It
You know,
is normal.
it's
No,
good.
yeah, I
It's-
tell that
it
to people
is.
all the time that they're so anxious to be cutting. I'm like, I was an assistant for 10 years.
I know.
Be patient.
You know, and I think there's gonna be movement from other sectors too. If you look at, Apple says they're the intersection of technology and something, what is it? Liberal arts. And I feel that, that's almost what post-production is. Post-production is sort of the intersection of storytelling and technology. And, there's all sorts of, Silicon Valley initiatives towards inclusivity and diversity. And if we are the intersection of storytelling and technology, that should at some point have an effect on us as well. But again, it's just going to take a lot of time and consciousness and visibility and directness.
I think something you said earlier, Kate, I think it's honesty that that's actually what you want. Do you actually want a more inclusive work environment? And be honest with yourself, and be honest about your biases, because then the answer to that will determine whether you'll actually take action to make that happen, right? So it's before we even start talking about the industry, what do you as a person want to see? And how much energy are you actually willing to put in to see that happen? Not everybody is going to have a folder on their desktop and pull from a big pool of things. Some people just don't really want to actively help that change. And for those who do, once you answer the question, like, yeah, I want to actively do that, then seek out the other people who also want to do that with you. And brainstorm ideas of how you can do that, whether it's hosting a women is it editorial?
Yeah.
If it's hosting a women in editorial night where you welcome other women who are in post with you, then great. But it starts with that first question of, do you really want this to happen? And do you actively want to take part in that? But I think that goes for everybody, the underrepresented and the ones who are represented,
Overrepresented.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned mentors, Kate. So can you tell me about a mentor you've had in your life and how they helped get you where you are?
Well, there's been several, yeah. I mean, there are three, when people ask me who are your mentors, there are three names that I always say. It's Alan Baumgarten, John Pohl, and Lisa Lassick. And they've all helped me in various ways, both in terms of how I edit, how I approach the craft, but also professionally in terms of, Alan was the one who got a call from someone at HBO and said, we're looking for an assistant who's ready to do the bump. We're doing this, get the bump up to editor. We're doing this tiny no-budget pilot. This woman, you probably have never heard of her name, Lena Dunham, is making this show called Girls. And, Alan was like, Kate, she's right for that. So, and, they've all helped me get jobs along the way. But I can still, I still do go to them if I have questions about what direction should I take this job or that job, or how should I deal with this sticky situation I find myself in. And they're also very good friends of mine too, but yeah, and it's important to have people who you can turn to, who you can trust, who are your friends who've come before. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Joe?
Yes, actually. I've had many mentors, but the guy who kind of set the ball rolling dates back to when I was actually in high school. I was originally going to, because we had a Cisco program, I was going to go into the IT networking career, and I had to do a lot of presentations and stuff like that. So I had to make videos, and I had to do slideshows and all that good stuff. And then the production of making those things kind of amused me. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So every time I would present, I would get encouragement from my teacher or my professor at the time, and then he would just kind of sometimes pull me aside and he would say, oh, I think, you know, you're probably more creative. I don't know if you really want to go in this field because it seems like you can just, you know, so he basically referred me to my other mentor, and then basically from there he kind of just set the ball rolling where I just kind of kept on going, and then since then it's just been mentors, like professional mentors, where sometimes, you know, that ball goes to the left and then this guy just gives me advice and then I go this way, you know, and but yeah, he's one of my main dudes.
My three big mentors were Lori Coleman, Stephen Mark, and Michael Ruscio. And I'm going to take it back to the first one to say Lori Coleman used to run the American Cinema Editors Internship. So American Cinema Editors is an honorary organization, sort of like the Academy for Editing. I guess that's what it is. And they have an internship program. And that's sort of how, that's not sort of, that is how my career got started. They interview X number of people, and they usually pick 2 or 3, and it at least gets you into, you get into the rooms and you meet people. And, you know, more trying to get people to apply for that internship, I could feel like letting colleges and universities know about it could really be helpful. But that's, you can trace my career back to, that got me in the door and that got me my first job working nights, working, you know, 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. as an assistant editor and going from there. So.
I've not had any direct professional mentors. My mom is my ultimate mentor. I talked to her even just before this.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to cite 3 people, it would be Michelle Eisenreich, formerly of Hammerhead, Andrew Bly, currently of The Molecule, and probably Jenny Foley of Creative Cartel. And those 3 people, because in one way or another, they answered the phone, they made me feel I belonged in the room, and they continually empower me to be better in every possible way without limitation. So those 3 would be the names I would cite professionally, but never in a direct, this is, you're my mentor, and they recognize me as their mentee kind of way. So.
How have you taken your experiences as a mentee and tried to be a mentor for others? If you've been able to do that, how does that influence you?
I mean,
No.
for me, I don't think I haven't been a direct, like, I'm aware that I'm this person's mentor, and but I do think that some have looked at me as that, and where I can, I give all the advice. I don't hold back whatever advice is necessary, and whatever they ask of me, I try to give it 100%. And then things like this, you know, welcoming opportunity to talk about what we do and where the opportunities are. You never know how this very conversation is touching any person watching or anybody in the room, and where they take that from there. So I haven't had any direct mentee, but where I can, I give you what I have. I give you everything that I have, as much as I can. Yeah.
I try to mentor my assistants as much as possible, and by trying to encourage them to edit, cut scenes, we'll work together on the scenes. One of my assistants once was someone I had met at a mixer who was working in a facility, and was like, I've been working in this facility for years, and I want to try to make the transition into scripted, episodic something, but I'm afraid to leave the safety of this job. And when I had an indie feature came my way, and I was like, do you want to come do this? You can put this on your resume. And that what led him to working in episodes, very successfully in episodic television. So stuff like that.
Yeah, the same, you know, help your assistants, mentor your assistants as much as possible. And also, you know, I often get people who reach out to me, who want to get coffee and pick my brain and that kind of thing. And I always try to, whenever I have the time, to do that. And there'll be different, you know, I had a woman several years ago who was a sophomore in college who found me on Facebook and messaged me because she was in Texas, because she wants to cut half-hour comedy. And, you know, so I Skyped with her and we kept in touch. And, you know, she was just assisting me, filling in for my assistant on this past week, you know, and so we stayed close and I see her a lot. And so it's just, yeah, maintaining those relationships and making yourself available when people want to learn from you and not being closed off to that.
Yeah, for me, it's the exact same thing, because I have assistants who, and it goes down a step further where they come in as interns, and they're green, they don't know anything, and, you know, I teach them as much as possible, you know, in a timely fashion, and, you know, and ultimately they have, you know, learned everything, and then, you know, sometimes they move on to, you know, other shows, they move on to scripted shows, they move on to different facilities, and it's great because they always call me, they always refer back to me, and they always say, you know, you were one of my first, you know, dudes, and I'm like, yeah, but you got a better job than me. But you know, ultimately, I think it's, you know, it just, you know, for me, I always, every time someone new comes, and they're eager to learn, then I will make sure that they know what they want to know, you know, because if someone comes in, they don't have the passion or they don't care for it, then, you know, obviously there's no chemistry, but if someone wants to, then I will stay and I will make sure that they know, and ultimately, who knows, maybe later in life, they might be like the EP of something, and then they might hire me as something else, you know, so, yep,
Being available to them.
all the time,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
I sometimes have young people come to me when they're just starting out, especially young women. They start to learn a little bit about like casual sexism, and they start to see it. They read more of the articles about how bad it is, and they get overwhelmed, and they come to me and they're like, how are you not just mad all the time? And I have to kind of talk them down and tell them to chill out, basically, because you can't be fighting all the time. So how do you all avoid getting too bogged down with the statistics and what you're supposed to be angry about all the time? How do you avoid that?
Separating for a little bit.
Yeah.
You can't constantly read that stuff. You'll lose your mind. So unplug for a moment. At least for me. I need to unplug, and I need to have an outlet, which is how we ended up meeting, was through Art of Post. What do you do outside of this that can keep you grounded? That's how I would get through it. It's I draw, I paint, I do whatever else that takes me away for a moment. And I'm clearer, and I have an emptier well, so to speak, so that when it does come back, you know, to all the controversy or what the numbers are and the truth of the matter, I have capacity to handle it, and I'm not overflowing with the despair of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and also on a day-to-day level, you're also just doing the work, you know? You need to just do the work. And so it's not like you're constantly getting bombarded with, hey, there's no other women here,
Yeah.
or guys saying inappropriate things, or racist things, or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. I mean, you just walk through life, you're doing the work, you know? So you can't even have the headspace to always be angry about it because you need to be working. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Well, if a 17-year-old kid came up and asked you for one piece of advice for a career in Post, what would you tell them today?
Find somebody whose career interests you, reach out to them, because, you know, it's probably pretty hard to get in touch with Steven Spielberg, but to get in touch with an editor or an online editor or a VFX producer is going to be a lot easier. Reach out to them and find out what their ladder looked like, because there are so many different ladders now. And just asking someone, what would your advice be? How did you get to where you are? People will really respond to that.
Yeah, I have a 16-year-old brother who will be 17 next year, so I'll probably tell him this. I tell him just be consistent and persistent with what you want to do, and just make sure you know what you want to do. And if you don't know, be curious about it, and then just find out what you like, what traits you need to achieve in order to get that. You know, just persistence, and then just consistency, and then you'll throw a rock and it'll land somewhere, and then from there you can just move on. So
Yeah, and patience too.
And patience, yep.
It's not gonna happen overnight, you know, and it's a 50-year career, or whatever it might end up being, so patience.
Yes to all of these, and something one of my undergrad professors told me, which was go where the lines are shortest.
That's good.
And that is applied in almost every area of my life. Just, you may want the big, role. But right now, it's gonna, like you said, it's gonna be harder to get to Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
You go to who you can get to, and you never know who they know, what branches come off of that tree. Because a visual effects producer will know an editor, and you might not think, let me reach out to this person and see how that could lead me to editorial. They might know someone to link you with that person to get you into the area of post you want to be in. So go where the lines are shortest and kick ass like while you're there.
Yeah.
Well, we've really covered it, but in a sentence, this is going to be difficult, but in a sentence, how is inclusion and accessibility important to the future of post-production?
In one sentence.
One sentence.
In a sentence-ish,
One more time with the question.
how is inclusion important to the future of post-production?
In every way possible. It's vital, on all levels. I'm not going to do this in one sentence. If we want to continue to tell, or if we want to begin telling more authentic stories, we need more voices in the whole process, and that includes post-production.
And this is important to the entire survival of the human race.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
It's,
I have nothing to add after that. Like,
Yeah.
that was it.
the more I talk, the worse it'll get. So.
I'll be the period.
Great. Well, that's the end of the questions that we have right now, so I want to open it up if anyone here has any questions they want to throw into the discussion.
Well, I'm surprised about talking about the lack of diversity in post-production, since in film, women were always very prominent in the editing room. And so I was curious why what makes you feel why we cater to a less diverse group now in digital post-production. And we're all looking at how much the percentage of people employed, but not every white male gets a job in the industry. So I was just also curious how that demographic matched in unemployment. Was it maybe the same proportion of unemployed women versus men, and people of color versus non-color?
I don't know, I can't speak to unemployment numbers, I'm not sure.
I know historically at the beginning we're talking like Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith. That's women originally were editors. At least what I was told in film school, that originally they thought that women could tell stories in such a way that were more accessible to everyone, and that physically putting two pieces of film together was more like being a seamstress. And that's where they're like put women in this job. So I think it's script supervisors and editors were sort of what women were allowed to do. So initially, and that continued for a while. There's a time, but then, once things get more either economically advantaged or not, I think those numbers changed. And I have worked with a lot of women in editorial, but I've seen the percentages for feature films, and I didn't know what they were for episodic television. So that's where I'm like, it's almost surprising me, because in my little sphere of influence bubble, there's been a good number of gender diversity.
But is it 50-50? It's like, for me, I can look back at the cutting rooms I've worked in, and I would say that about, for every 4 people, 1 of them was a woman, which is what the statistics are for membership at the Editors Guild. It's
Right.
75% male.
But how does that compare to the number of people that applied for the job? I mean,
Well, that,
Yeah.
there's no way for me to
That's-
yeah, I mean,
that's
there
an
might,
unknown.
there might have been 25% for women and 6 men. And so now 1 woman is 25%, and 3 men are 50% of the market. So we're not looking at the whole picture necessarily.
But we are looking at the whole picture because there should be 5 women and 5 men applying for the job.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So when you say there are more men who apply, that in and of itself is a problem.
Right, and I think the guild membership is really a good indicator of the makeup of the larger industry. Because it is, what were the,
I think it's roughly 75% men.
yeah,
Yeah.
75% male in the guild. And those are people that have hit a certain point in their careers. So I think that's good. And I think you can also look at user groups across the country, not just in LA. Those that happen on weeknights tend to be people that are between gigs, and it is not very diverse. So I think that you can look at different bits of evidence and kind of get a bigger picture. I don't know that it's possible to look at unemployment. Anything else, Ed? Any other questions? Want to throw into the conversation? You have 4 amazing people sitting here. You can ask them whatever you want.
I'm just glad you're doing this, because I've been in a lot of post presentations. People are feeling they're progressive and they're sensitive and they're concerned about this issue, but it just hasn't been much done, in a efficient kind of way, it seems to me, especially when you compare it to other parts of the industry or other industries.
Well, we're glad you're here too. Yeah, this conversation doesn't happen as much in post-production. It tends to be with directing and writing and stuff like that, which is then why I think it's harder to get representation visually for people in post-production. Because people see directors, they don't see editors. So,
That goes back, we were talking earlier, you have these huge conferences and maybe we have a corner or a half a day where they talk about post-production. It's just not, I don't want to use the word respected in this, but it's not as loudly talked about.
Right.
Post-production in general.
It's not as glamorous.
Yeah,
No.
so even though it's huge, it's vital.
Yep.
So I think that's part of the reason why those conversations don't happen, because we're used to not speaking very much about things, I think, as much as the other areas, the louder, brighter, shinier areas.
They're also shinier, and they're also, like, people don't know what editors do.
Yeah.
You know what a writer does, and you have a vague idea of what a director does if you have nothing to do with the entertainment industry. You have no idea what the editor does.
Yeah.
People think I cut the slates off.
They cut the slates off. That's it. Yeah.
No, that's not what I did. Yeah. So.
right, and I never really knew what a VFX producer does or how the pipeline worked. And then I realized that there were VFX producers for every house, multiple, and I don't know how you do the job that you do. It's so complicated. I don't know where I was going with that other than to say you're really great.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I remember I was on a panel for, the VES did a panel, Discovering VFX for independent filmmakers, and my mom was there, because like I said, she's the #1 mentor, and for the first time, she finally understood what I did, because I was giving a presentation on what I do. But even still, I have family members who will say, my cousin is an editor. I'm not an editor. So I totally understand what you mean. Like, they don't know what an editor does, but they've heard of what an editor is.
Yeah.
I'm just an
Yeah,
editor.
they've never even heard of what you do.
Who's a visual effects producer, but everyone thinks that means I edit films.
Right.
So,
And you do the compositing yourself.
or yeah, they
Or
think that
you do
too.
the,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and they don't even know what that means. So.
Right.
Yeah, I think another reason that the conversation's a little underrepresented for post is that a lot of us feel like we don't have much to say about it. we're not interesting. And I think that everybody here should be more active in talking about what they do to people, especially young people, and just talking about how cool your job is, whether you're in the creative side or the technology side, especially in the technology side, because I mean, I can't explain to anybody what I do. They're like, so you're an editor, or you cut? No, I don't. It's very abstract. So I think that prioritizing talking about what we do, whether they want to hear it or not,
Yep.
is a good way to go.
Yeah.
Can I just add, I think just to add what you guys are saying, I think social media, because there is so much with social media that you can change and enhance and I think young people are doing a lot to edit their own stuff on Facebook, or these applications are easy to use now. I think people are gonna start to understand post-production a lot better with the generations coming up. So I think you'll have a lot more diversity because they're gonna be exposed, more people are gonna be exposed to it. I don't think we're gonna be able to stop diversity from becoming bigger and better, because there's no way, because people know what we do now. No one knew what post-production was 20 years ago. Like when I started editing in New York, there was maybe one female editor for 10 to 15 male editors. 15, 20 years later, it's pretty close to half and half at the places I worked in New York. Now, with diversity as far as ethnicity, not as much. But I think in 15 to 20 years, you're just gonna see that because it's just out there. Like now, it really is out there, which it wasn't before.
You can't dream of having a job unless you know it exists.
Right.
And for most people living in an urban environment without any attachment to Hollywood, just in Chicago or smaller places, all they know is the director or the actor. And there's only one director per movie, so that doesn't leave you a lot of openings for jobs. But there's a lot of jobs in this industry that people just don't go for because they don't know exist.
iMovie's gonna change everything.
Oh,
Yeah, it's on your phone and your iPad,
Yeah.
and so now at least people will have an understanding of, oh wait, you can take
I
T2.
show people on my phone, like, oh, you wanna edit? Okay, this is a very simple way to figure out what I do, you know?
Yeah. That's great.
And then you have all the outsourced things. We think of the lack of diversity in our industry, but we're not counting all the Koreans and so on that are working on our projects.
That's true.
So in a sense, it depends on where your perspective is.
Yeah.
So how much of that?
Are you talking like when you outsource like animation stuff?
Yes, and effects. I mean, especially effects.
No,
and
effects is a
editing.
very special corner. That's what I said earlier. It's a very special corner of the industry where if you nerd out and you're an awesome compositor or a dynamic specialist or any number of the crafts that go in visual effects, you're gonna do well for yourself, and it doesn't matter, what background you have, because if you are awesome, you're awesome. If you make that, if you destroy Los Angeles better than anybody else, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what where you come from.
That's true.
But when I was speaking about my experience, if I'm talking specifically about the African American community, I don't see very many there. But it goes back to what we were talking about, right? If you don't know about it, you're not gonna go there.
Yeah, so it depends on how many people are knocking on the door and how many, maybe all of them got through, but there weren't any people knocking on that door.
Yeah,
Visibility will help
yeah.
a lot.
It's education and outreach
Yeah.
for young people.
So unrelated a little bit to inclusion and diversity, but what is it about your jobs that you love? Like, what is the thing about whatever you do that you love the most? It's kind of a big question.
I love that we're the first editors are the first ones who actually get to see the episode or get to see the movie. Up until then, it's like the script is just somebody writing directions, and then they go and they shoot. They follow the directions, they shoot it, but you don't really know what it's going to be, what it's going to look like. You can have an idea and you can have a goal, but we're really the first ones who take all the pieces of the puzzle and put the puzzle together. and get to see it for the first time, and get to mold what the puzzle it looks like, you know, I mean, so that's what I love about it, yeah.
For me, it's the ultimate make-believe. We start out with a locked cut, and what it looked like in the locked edit is not how we give it back. If you have an all green screen shot, that's gonna look totally different than what it did on set. It's the ultimate make-believe. We lie better than everyone. So I love that. And just to watch it go from what it was on set to a locked edit, and then we finish it out and deliver it back, that's so fun to me.
And then we unlock the edit.
Yeah, yeah, then we have to make it again, yeah.
No handles?
Yeah.
You know, for me, I find it personally satisfying when there was a difficult scene that wasn't working and we found a way to make it work. Or if there was a scene that somebody was like, you know what, this wasn't what I imagined and we're gonna reimagine this now. So I always say that like what we do is sort of like the chopped cooking show. It's like you open the basket and there's, you know, 4 weird things in there and you have to be like, okay. And then you have to make sense of them. And that, when those scenes come up, I always find that really fulfilling.
I've worked with you, Chris.
Yeah.
'Cause, you know, you're the online editor at our place. And, you know, honestly, what I love about the job is the collaboration that we have. Because, you know, I make sure that everything technically is good for you, and then you make sure that the show looks great. And then at the end, we both deliver something that's great, and it airs, and that's another thing we add to the resume. So, that's what I enjoy.
Great. Good question.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and just wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Lauren, Mark, Kate, and Joe for participating in this discussion. It can be an iffy topic to deal with, but I really appreciate that they're willing to come up and speak from their positions in the industry and try to make post more represented for different groups. Just so you know, this is the first in a series, like I said. The next panel is going to be August 13th, probably here again, and it'll be about mental health and creativity. So we're going to have a discussion on what that means and how to keep yourself healthy in post-production mentally. And our next meetup is going to be August 20th at the Powder Room. So hopefully you can come and hang out with us. It's always happy hour there, which is pretty great. So you guys should come check it out too. So thank you so much. Thanks again to the Sim group for helping us with the live stream and the stats. And if you're not a fan of Blue Collar Post Collective on Facebook, you should be, because then you can come find this live stream and share it with all your friends.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.